Hello again and welcome. Yesterday I had the privilege of going down to Simon Hope's workshop down in Essex. Some while ago Simon asked me if I'd be interested in filming him doing a tutorial on the threading jig that he produces and sells, and I jumped at the chance. We had a great day. Thanks very much for your hospitality, Simon. I thoroughly enjoyed your company. And I must say this as well, you make a really spot on cheese and onion toastie. Absolutely delicious. Thank you for that too. And your coffee wasn't too bad either. We had a really great day, we had a lot of laughs, a lot of fun, but by God, can you tell that Simon is a professional. Anyway, the video I'm putting up today is quite a long one. It's about 25-26 minutes, and it is basically the tutorial, and people who are thinking of having or purchasing a threading jig from Simon, or indeed have one already, can use it as a visual manual. So I'm putting it up on my channel for that reason, and there'll also be a shorter video after this one, which I'll put up together, which will give some hints and tips on getting the maximum amount of benefit from the threading jig. All the relevant links to Simon's website and contact details I'll put in the description below.
Hello, I'm Simon Hope, and thanks for watching this video on how to use the Easy Set threading jig. I'm going to show you the basic one first of all, and if you continue watching I'll then go on to using the hinge plate, which is an extra, and I'll show you the advantages of that. So this is the basic jig out of the box. I've screwed the stem in. First thing we need to do is actually get the centre height correct. So it's got a dimple at the back. You just take that up and use the tailstock just to get that on the centre height there. And then we'll just adjust the collar and set that. And once that's been done, the jig will just pop in and out at the correct setting. When you first buy it and screw the stem in, you do need to screw the stem tight, and that's just through the setting on there. And while we're here, I'll just show you how to change the spindles if you ever buy a different size spindle, and that's simply done by undoing the handle at the back, taking the adjustment ring off, removing that grub screw, and then the part just comes out. And then you can change, if you buy for instance a 12 TPI, that's how you change it. The important thing with these is that all the tension's preset when you purchase them through this bit here. So when you pop them in and out, you don't have to reset and adjust to use it. So that's the jig basically set up. We'll get a bit of wood on the lathe, and then we'll cut some threads. So what we've got here is a bit of sycamore mounted up, and if I was making a threaded box or an item, I'd always do the female thread first, because I find it easier to match the male up to the female. So if this was a box, this will be the inside of a lid. I'm going to use my little 6mm carbide tool. It's just what I prefer to use, but whatever means you've got to get in there to take out. We need to hollow that out, leave a nice parallel edge to cut the threads, and then I'm going to run some super glue on the edge just to harden the timber in order to actually cut a thread on the sycamore. So we'll get the lathe fired up. I'm going around about 3,300 RPM. I'm going to start just by cleaning up this edge here. So a nice little bit of shear scraping, and then we'll cut in. Now, the thing I like about this tool is that I can actually do a nice finishing cut across the bottom by shear scraping or shear cutting, and actually run into the corner. So as I go into the corner, it produces a nice clean undercut that the threading tool can go into without the danger of hitting the bottom of the box. So what I'm going to do is just to make sure this is nice and clean on this edge and make sure it's parallel. So we'll just clean that up, put a little chamfer on that edge, and then I'll just show you a little trick to check whether or not it's parallel. I'm going to use an Allen key, and what I like to do is just use the flat of an Allen key, just get your finger in there like that, and you can actually see by looking down just how accurate you've been in cutting that parallel. Now it's out slightly, I need to just make a little bit of adjustment at the back there, so let me just do that quickly. Just blow the dust out. Double check for our parallel. Yep, that's spot on. So I'm just going to run some thin cyanacrylate glue just in on this part here. This will soak in and harden and just prevent the tips from breaking out. So normally sycamore would be a timber you wouldn't normally associate with threading, but with the jig and the fact that I'm hardening the surface with the glue, it allows the timber to actually take quite a nice thread. So I'll just activate that off, and we'll transform that now onto the jig, and then we'll show the actual cutting of the threads. So there's a couple of ways of actually mounting up the cutter. I've got a spare chuck, so you could use that. You could just use a standard chuck and just take the jaws off and just use the carriers. This is my Axminster with the engineering jaws, which are quite nice. So you could hold the cutter, which has a 10mm shaft, like so, or you could use the 2 Morse taper cutter holder. We'll use this a bit later on, we'll use this for now. But this also works nicely, and it just is an optional extra for those who just don't have sort of spare chucks, and it just saves taking jaws off and stuff like that. So we'll use that for this demonstration. Just make sure that that's on there correctly. So what we're going to do is we're just going to mount this up onto the jig. So I'll just wind it on like so. Just give it a bit of a snap to make sure it's on there proper. And then what I like to do, or what it needs, is to have a sort of fingers gap here and a gap at this point. We'll talk about the click system and how it moves in and out when we get to that bit. But initially you need a gap here and a gap here. So I'm just going to get it into position. What we need to do is to actually get this parallel. So it takes a couple of times to get used to it, you know, but I actually find it reasonably easy. I just get the cutter on the inside edge, and then I just sort of pivot and just look down at the chuck. So I'm looking at the top of the chuck here to the bed bars to make sure that it's parallel. So when you're happy that it is, just lock everything off, make sure everything's fully locked off. You don't want anything moving. And then the reason we have the gap here and the gap here is that we can come fully out of the way. So we can actually start the cut off and actually blend it in a bit at a time until we actually do what's called the kiss test, where the cutter is just touching the bit of wood. So I'm going to get it to that point now. So we're going to fire the lathe up. I'm going to run it fast as the lathe can go actually for this small cutter. So around about 3,500. And then what I'm going to do is a series of back and forth. So I'm going to go in and I'm just going to click forward, just do a click at a time or two to get it in, so it's just touching the timber. Yep, so it's just touching now. We'll just stop for a second. So that's 0. Now for all my spindles there's a certain amount of clicks needed to go to the correct depth. So for instance the 20 TPI requires 3 clicks, and it's built into the handle, little click system. You'll see it as I'm using it. So 20 TPI it's 3 clicks, and that's to thread depth. This is 16 TPI, which I sort of supply as standard. It's the sort of run-of-the-mill thread that most people would like to use for their boxes, etc. And that's 5 clicks. So now that we've got to our sort of 0 setting, what I'm actually going to do, I'm going to go 4 clicks and do most of the work, and then we'll do a final click as a finishing cut. And I'll look at the timber at that point and decide whether it actually needs a little bit more super glue. So listening, you might be able to hear it click. We're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, lock the handle off, and we're going to cut all the way in and back out again. So we're going to cut into our gap so we can hear it stop cutting, and we're just simply going to come back out again, and we're going to stop and have a look. Now, because I'm using sycamore, which I know is a soft timber, this is the opportunity now just to run a little bit more super glue in. So what I would do is actually just run a little bit of thin into the grooves, let it run round, and because we've already cut sort of into the timber, yeah, that will soak in and harden everything up in order for us to do our final finishing cut. Remember, we've only done 4, we need to do 5 to go to thread depth. So I'll just activate that off. Yeah, release the handle, click, tighten the handle, and we'll do our final cut. Into the gap, we'll come back out again, and we'll just turn that around so you can see we've cut the perfect thread. Okay, so we need to make this bit fit the lid, so we'll talk about that process. What I'm going to do is just make a nice finishing cut down there, just to get rid of any previous marks. Especially if you use the parting tool, that can leave quite a rough surface. So we always make sure I clean that first. So glasses on, and then we'll just run a bowl gouge down the surface just to get that nice and clean. And then what I'm going to do is use some digital verniers to actually work out my offset. Now what I do is get those in on the inside. It's important that you actually wobble it across the surface there to get the maximum diameter. It's very easy just to go in like that and you think you've got it, and it's not. So you have to sort of wobble it to make sure you've got the maximum diameter. We'll carefully take that out, and then we'll add our offset. So what I do is press 0, and for 16 TPI it's 1.1 offset. So we simply on 0 add our 1.1. So it's different for the different thread pitches. So for instance, if it was 14 TPI, it would register, you'd need to register about a 1.6 offset. So it's 1.07, 1.13, 1.08. So that's close enough. So we'll just lock everything off and put our marking onto there. Now I'll just say very quickly, I'm going to use the verniers to actually mark on the wood, but be very careful if you haven't tried this before. We're going to point slightly downhill, we're going to mark the wood with the left hand side until it meets up with the right hand side, but if you actually catch the wood on the right hand side, this could flick up towards you. So be very careful if you're trying this for the first time, but it is a very quick and accurate way of transferring sizes. So let's get that bit done. So that's my mark there, and then we'll just turn this round and cut the spigot. So I'm just going to go in with a parting tool. Now a little trick, what I do is put a little chamfer on the front edge, and then I just run the verniers back on that chamfer. And what that actually does is centralise up and give you a final marking. I can just about see it, you know, where to go to. So it's just like a fine tuning trick. So that's the right size. We do need a groove at the back, so I'm going to use my thin parting tool. Make sure you've got a little chamfer at the front, and I just take the sharp edge off the back, and that's now set to put some super glue on. Okay, so I'm going to use some thin cyanacrylate glue again, and I'll just use the Bond Lock. I find that works really well, but whatever you normally use. Definitely use the thin, because that sort of soaks in to the timber. And we'll just get some tissue on there just to take the surface amount off and just activate it. And that's ready for cutting the thread. I'm not actually going to complete the whole box and hollow out. We're just going to make the 2 parts thread just to show you how it all works. So I'm going to take this off, put it on the jig, mount the cutter up, and then we'll show you the cutting. Okay, so I've mounted the cutter up. I've put the chuck onto the threading jig. Make sure you've got your finger gap here, and again make sure you've got about 10mm gap on that part. And then we're going to take it up to the cutter, and what I actually do is rest it on the part there and actually pivot until I see that it's parallel. Now you might mark the wood, but that's the bit you're actually going to cut into, so it doesn't really matter. So we're into there and we're parallel there. So lock everything down, and this is again the reason why we have these gaps here, because we can come out of the way. We'll fire that up and we'll do the kiss test, and then we'll count off our clicks. So we'll take it in slowly. I'll maybe do a couple of clicks to get it close, and then I'll do one at a time and just take it in until we get our kiss test. One more. Yep, so it's just touching the wood. I can just see it cutting the wood. So we're going to do our 4 clicks initially. 1, 2, 3, 4. And we're going to cut into the groove and just stop short. Now this version 2 model, which is what's available now, has this depth stop on the back. And what this allows you to do is we can set that. It won't damage the threads. There's a brass tipped grub screw in there. But now each time we come to that point, it will always stop so it doesn't hit the shoulder. We'll come out and we'll just run some super glue in there before we do our final cut. So just very, very gently, carefully, just run a little bit of thin into the timber, into the grooves, like so. On harder timbers you wouldn't need to do this, of course. It's just on the softer timbers, you know, sycamore, ash, yeah, timbers like that you'd have to just run this extra little bit of super glue into. So we've got that, we've done our 4 clicks, we need 5 clicks to go to our thread depth, so we'll just do our final click and we'll get that cut. Into there, we can stop, we'll just come out. We've gone to depth. Yep, so yeah, just add a little bit more wax on that. Yeah, so what I like to try and aim for is a loose thread. And when you put the wax on, you can actually see that spinning. Yeah, and that's what I like to try and aim for. So if you make it to exactly the right offset and do the clicks, this is what you'll be able to produce. A lovely thread. Okay, what I'm going to actually do now is show the hinge plate in operation. So I've made another male thread. I haven't actually cut the threads yet. We'll show that and the advantage of actually having the hinge plate. I'm also going to show the morse taper cutter holder. So it's a stainless steel 2 morse taper. We'll mount that in. It does have a drawbar, which is really important because we don't want that to vibrate loose. So I'll just get that mounted up. And the other really important thing, you might not see it in the camera, I don't know, but make sure you don't have too much threaded bar sticking out the end. So I say a maximum of 3 inches. If it's any longer, then as it's spinning, that can actually start to whip and actually bend the threaded rod. So that's important. If you buy one of these, you might have to cut it down to length. So that will mount onto there as normal. We still need our gaps here and here as normal. We'll take it down to the cutter and then we'll zoom in and actually show the next sort of operation. Okay, so I've made sure that that's parallel and I've done the normal thing there. We'll come out of the way and we'll do our kiss test. Now because I've got the hinge plate, what I've actually done, I've done the offset 1.15, so I've deliberately made it slightly bigger so I can show you a little tip to actually take it down to exactly the right thread that you'd want for wooden threads. You just get a little bit more control with the hinge plate, which I'll show. So we'll do the kiss test, we'll fire that up. Again, fast speeds, as fast as the lathe will go really. And we'll just take that down. One more hopefully. Yeah, so it's just started to cut. So that's our 0. We'll do 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. We'll come into our gap and I'll just set the depth stop up. Like so, and we'll come out. Now the advantage of having the hinge plate from this bit is straight away we can now come up and actually add our super glue onto there. So that's one advantage, that we're not working close down to the cutter. So we'll just drop our super glue into the threads. Like so. We'll just use a little bit of tissue and activate that off. We'll come fully back that way, or you could go all the way to the stop, but we'll come just clear. And the hinge plate's very accurately made, so once that clicks in, that is exactly back to the position that it was. So we can do our final click, yeah, do our finishing cut, yeah, and then we can come out the way to actually check our thread. Now you'll see, because I've done it slightly bigger, it's just slightly tight. So what we can do is use a bit of abrasive, yeah, and what I do is just run that on the tips and just sand the tips down. Blow that out, and we can go back down, just do another click. Yeah, so we've taken the tips off, we now need to make the valleys just a bit deeper. Still just a little bit too tight. One more click. And that allows us to get our threads exactly the way we want them. And you can see now, we move that over, we've got that perfect thread that spins when you go on. You need that because if there's a bit of movement in the wood, the threads will lock in. So you do need that bit of movement. And with the hinge plate, it just allows you more control to obtain that. Thank you for watching this small video on how to use the Easy Set Threading Jig. I'm going to do another little separate video just on a few tips, but if they don't answer your questions, please just drop us an email. The details will follow. But thank you very much. So the first few tips I'm going to talk about is just to show you different ways of holding the cutter. If you don't have the morse taper cutter holder, So if you've got a spare chuck, you can just take the jaws off, and that actually fits quite nicely in the carriers, so you can use that successfully on a standard small 4-jaw chuck. I've also got the engineering jaws. We've actually used that, so we've sort of shown how that's used, but that works really nice as well. The other way is to use a Jacob's chuck. This is a quick release one, but I'd never recommend putting it straight into there and holding the cutter, because it's very likely to sort of vibrate loose. So if you've got one with a drawbar, that's fine, but just as another little tip, it's actually a very safe way of holding the Jacob's chuck is to actually put your chuck on, and I've noticed that the 2 morse taper fits nicely in the centre. The jaws will grab on the outer circle, and then it's fully encapsulated in the chuck, and it's safe. It's not going to vibrate loose, and you can quite happily turn the threads that way. Sometimes it's just a tiny bit out, but if it's spinning at 3000 RPM, it's still going to make a nice clean cut. So that's just a safe way of holding the cutter. And of course, what we've already shown, the cutter holder with the drawbar, if you haven't got these other options. So the next little tip I want to talk about is when you're actually cutting the thread itself. So I don't know if you noticed the way that I actually held the chuck and the piece of work, but I found that if you hold it like this when you're actually cutting, I put just a slight forward force or support with my left hand while I'm cutting, and then when I'm coming back out of the cut, just put a little bit of pressure on with this finger as I'm coming out. And what that does is just ease the wood off the cutter, just to prevent it from sort of catching and maybe tearing a bit out. So over the sort of year or so that I've been using the jig, I found that that does actually help, and that's worth doing that. The other little thing about the jig is the bit on the back here. I'll just turn that round. You'll see a little Allen key. That little grub screw there actually adjusts the click and how much force you want the sort of ball bearing in there to sort of bind down. So the more you tighten it in, the more it clicks, but it gets harder to turn the handle. So that might just be something you want to personally adjust. I adjust them to what I think's right, but if you can't feel the click clearly, then just tighten that bit up again and you can feel it more positively as you're cutting. So you've seen the hinge plate in operation and how that works and goes back into the right position. Just one thing to mention, it is a retrofit to jigs that have already previously been purchased. So if you've bought a jig before, you can just buy that part and it will all fit and add together. So a little thing I want to mention with the basic kit. So if you haven't got the hinge plate that allows you to check whether you've got the thread, there is actually quite an easy way of actually getting it back in position if you do actually get it wrong. So if you get your offset wrong and it's too tight, so for instance I've done the cut, I pull away, I find that it's too tight, darn it, you need to take a bit more off. It's not the end of the world. So what you need to do is just get it back in position, give yourself the same gaps as what you had before, as if we were doing the kiss test. We get it just above the threads and we get it parallel. So we just line that up, get it parallel, which I've done. Yeah. Next thing we need to do is just get the cutter lined up with the valley of the thread. Yeah, so it's in the same line. So what this jig allows you to do, this collar system here is quite accurately machined. So you've actually got quite a bit of play within that for realigning the thread up. So you just simply look down, line it up. Yep, so you might see a little gap here, but we've lined the cutter up with the valley. Take it down a couple of clicks, take the cutter out, and then just do a click at a time and you'll see it will cut back in the right position, and then you might just want to do an extra click after you've used the sandpaper on the tips, same as what we showed you in the other video, and that's how you'd use the basic jig to realign if you needed to take just a little bit more down. So I've shown you briefly the extra spindles that you can purchase. This is a 14 TPI and this is how they'll come with this preset. Now sometimes after use there's a little plastic bit in there. You might find that there's a little bit of play develops. If that happens, then all you need to do is just release that nut, just such a fine little turn, just to pinch that in, retighten it up and you're good to go. There should be a little bit of resistance there, and that's actually quite important. If it run really free, you could get it spinning with the cutter. Yeah, it could sort of run away. So you do need a bit of resistance there, and it cuts better that way with that bit of resistance going in the cutter. But that takes all the play 100% out of that front, and it's actually engineered to be wobble free at the back. That's actually built in. The other little thing about the jig, you'll notice that you know, apart from this one which we've talked about and you can adjust, there's other small little grub screws. Don't touch any of those. They're all to hold bearings and bits that are inside to make it all run smooth. So the only thing you should ever really need to touch is this one here if you want to adjust the click. This one here if you find that the slide gets sloppy, because this puts tension on the wobble that way. So that's the only one. Same as that, you undo it and just pinch it up a little bit. And of course with, you know, lots of use, that will wear down just a tad, and after maybe 6 months you'll just have to retighten that. But all the other grub screws that you'll find underneath, please just leave those alone, because they'll be undoing bearings and stuff inside. So thanks for watching again, and I hope those tips were useful. If you do have any more questions or queries, please just contact me on the details below. Thank you for watching.